The church is growing faster today than at any time in history, but little has changed. So what's up with that? Join me as we look at this more closely. This video, good news, bad news, well, it's a little technical, but it's important, for it places the realities of your congregation into a bigger picture, a global perspective. The information in this video will help you prepare to preach the first sermon in this series, What's Missing? I start with some astonishing news. The Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Seminary reports that Christianity is growing more rapidly than at any other time in history. Listen to this. From 1970 to 2020, the global Christian population increased from 1.2 billion to 2.6 billion believers. This is an increase of 1.4 billion Christians, a 207% growth rate. Christians now account for 1/3 of the world's population. This study predicts that by 2050, the global Christian population will grow to 3.3 billion, an increase of nearly 800 million more Christians in just the next 30 years. As you've heard, the Christian population is growing more rapidly in the global south, that is, in nations south of the equator, than in nations north of the equator. This is especially true on the continent of Africa. From 1970 to 2020, the Christian population in Africa grew from 143 million to 631 million believers. This is a whopping 441% growth rate. Today, Christians account for 50% of the African population, and it's predicted that by 2050, Africa will see 70 million additional Christians. There are some places in Africa, notably East Africa, where 67% of the population is committed to Christ. This is remarkable news, stunning news, amazing news, astonishing, and, as you can tell, words aren't adequate to describe the phenomenal growth of Christ's church around the globe. This is good news indeed. Regrettably, there's some bad news. This same study reveals that despite this remarkable growth, little has changed. Christ's church excels in so many things. So why? Why isn't the growing church making a growing impact? What's keeping the church from participating fully, freely, and effectively in God's plan to renew all things? What's holding the church down? What's missing? Dr. Oliver Kasaka, the recently retired Deputy General Secretary of the National Council of Churches of Kenya, observed this same phenomenon in sub-Saharan Africa. Unprecedented growth, yet with little to no change. This prompted him to ask, and these are his words, what's holding the Church of Africa down? What's missing? Kasaka recruited his counterparts from nations across sub-Saharan Africa to search for an answer to this dilemma, this predicament. His team identified and isolated several African realities they felt might be crippling the African church, keeping her from fulfilling her mission. This study considered several factors, including such things as poverty, corruption, political climate, violence and wars, the prosperity gospel, global and African economic trends, well, as you can see, several others. After 7 years of intensive research, This team identified and isolated a totally unexpected, unimagined, unlooked for discovery, a factor not even considered in their original research design. And I quote, "There's just one thing missing. African Christians have not been taught to give." Does this discovery not echo the words of the Apostle Paul to the Corinthian Christians? As you excel in everything, in faith, speech, knowledge, eagerness, and love, see to it that you also excel in this grace of giving. Can you not hear Paul saying, there's just one thing missing? One thing keeping you from fully, joyfully participating in God's redemptive plan to restore His creation? As I once paraphrased this passage, I now want you all to step up and do this one thing. Always exceed the ordinary expectations by the kind of lavish and generous giving that kindles a chain reaction of gratitude, joy, praise, and worship. This compels me to ask you, what's holding your church down? What's preventing the people in your congregation, your denomination, from passionately and effectively participating in God's plan to restore His creation? Well, I agree with Dr. Kasaka. There is just one thing missing. God's people are not being taught to give, and it's sucking the life out of the church, crippling her mission. Might this be true for your congregation? Unfortunately, this problem is not unique to your congregation, nor a problem unique to Africa. This is a global issue identified by church leaders around the world. In fact, many believe this is the single greatest threat to the church in this century. My point is this: learning to excel in the grace of giving is critical to your congregation's capacity to participate in God's plan, critical to their spiritual growth and maturity. The good news is, the gift of giving can be matured, so you must be the one to step up, to inspire, challenge, and teach your congregation how to give God's way, how to live God's way. This sermon is your first step. God bless you as you prepare to preach.